Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the iONE. So this is the iONE. It is a single dynamic driver. It costs about $250, and I do want to thank Keephifi for sending it to Jason Lucas, who was generous enough to give me this one as a short-term loan just to review it. So many thanks to Keephifi and Jason for sending this one to me. So here's what it looks like up close. It's kind of got these handsome metal shells, and I think this is actually a little resin-filled window, which isn't going to show up too great, except for my fingerprints on video, but the shell is actually quite nice. It's probably aluminum. It's actually lightweight, kind of nice metal grills. This, of course, is the Wolfram cable, which on its own is about $200. I can't remember which fancy connectors it has, but this is a 4-core pure silver. And I will caution people who are interested in this cable. This one has these super springy ear hooks, and I'm not a big fan of anything that wraps around like that. It's very tight, and to put it in your ear, it tends to tug on the shell a little bit too much, and it kind of pulls it out of your ear. So very nice cable. Not a huge fan of the ear hooks, though. So the packaging, it's got an extreme amount of packaging around a nice shell like that. It says, try iONE, put down noise, and enjoy music. So when we open it up, this one kind of folds into a huge thing here, which doesn't even fit in my camera view, but you get a nice deer picture, which represents something. And inside, you kind of get the normal shells, cable, accessories, 2 pairs of tips, and a really nice TRI cable. And it says, peace and listen. So that's what we got on the inside. Again, it is a lot of cardboard. It is a lot of packaging to ship. So I'm not sure why they went that route, but that's what they did. So let's kind of jump right into it. And this is going to be a very quick one, mainly because of number one. This thing sounds very nearly like an undampened dynamic driver. It sounds harsh, bright, and noisy, as you would expect it to. That's what they sound like. And it's really only for low volume listening with small bore tips. That kind of gets you into a zone where you could listen to this. So let's kind of look at it really quickly. So when we look at the graph, and the iONE stock is in blue, which is that guy. So it's got some elevated bass to compensate for the pin gain right there. In green, we have iONE with no filter. So no filter is nothing on the nozzle. This is hearing the dynamic driver straight through the nozzle, no damper, no filter, no nothing, just empty nozzle. And so you can kind of see where the blue line, this iONE stock, is actually quite close. I think that's like 3 dB away from no filter on iONE. It's kind of a crazy thing to think about, that they shipped a set that is, nearly undampened. And not only is it bright and peaky like that, but it's also very noisy. So without proper dampening, the driver tends to make a lot of distortion and noise, and that's exactly what you hear on iONE at any amount of volume. At lower volume, it kind of sounds reasonable, but once you start pushing the driver just a little bit, the whole thing gets very unnoisy, and it sort of sounds unrefined, but what it really is noise. So one thing you can do is put micropore on the nozzle. You could put anything on the nozzle. You could put a damper on the nozzle, anything to add a little pressure to keep that driver from flapping around. And then you get sort of a more harmonish, heavy bass, more reasonable pin gain. That's the red if you just put micropore on the tape. But yeah, these 2 peaks right there, it's kind of scary that they shipped a set that is that close to being just listening to the raw driver in the shell with there's really nothing in between the driver and the nozzle, which sounds okay. That's a transparent way to listen to something, but wow, those peaks and that brightness and all that noise at some kind of reasonable volume is really hard to take. So like I said, put a damper or micropore tape on the nozzle, that noise goes away. So once you add a little more pressure to it and that driver stops vibrating, all that noise goes away. It's kind of like hearing a noise filter. Everything becomes a lot cleaner, not bright, and it sounds much more natural. This one you know, it actually sounds okay as a one dynamic driver set. And like I said, this cable itself sells for $200 on its own. The set plus the cable is about $250. So if they had actually, you know, subtracted a $200 cable from the price, you know, it's probably about a $50 sounding set as it is. They really need to kind of rework it, because I think the driver does have a ton of potential, but the way they delivered it is not so good. So the bass, like I said, it's really boosted to compensate for that undampened dynamic driver. It's a lot of bass. That's, I think, a 20. Yeah, that's even more than that's, you know, 12 or 13 dB on bass just to make up for those peaks. And it doesn't really do a great job of that, because as you turn up the volume, these get sharper and sharper and brighter and harsher and harsher. So yeah, it's a bit too much. But if you like a bass head, you could actually cover the vent too and actually give it a little more bass, and that will compensate for the peaks a little bit more. The mids, they're just kind of barely okay. They need to be reworked. And if you just put micropore tape on it, you'll see that this is a bit low. That's probably about 6 or 7 dB, and this could probably be bumped up really close to where Harman is, and that would be fine. But I'm not going to sit there and play with it to get it to the sound right. The mids needs to be reworked, and the bass needs to be lowered, and the whole thing needs to be cleaned up. But a lot of it, again, is this recipe for success. You've got to set up your mids to sound right, and that much bass, they're not going to sound right. That much pin gain, they're not going to sound right. So you need to rework those. Treble. So once you put some micropore tape on it, have very small bore tips, and if you can actually hear past that 4K, those two peaks, it's actually not bad. Most of the undampened noise from that treble, a lot of the undampened noise, as in stock form, is actually from the treble. Lots of cymbals make lots of noise, and when you get rid of that with micropore tape, so you could hear it and it sounds cleaned up, it's actually kind of reasonable. Again, I think the bones are good here. The driver is pretty reasonable, but the tuning needs to be really reworked to actually hear with balance all the way from a reasonable amount of bass through nice clean mids through this balanced treble, which is not really there today. So stage in stock form, there's just no stage. It's super flat in your face because it's so forward, so bright, so in your face. With tape, something on the nozzle, it goes wider and it's pushed back, and there's actually even a hint of height. But in stock form, the stage isn't so good. So that is what I got on Try iONE. They should probably rework it. The driver is kind of reasonable, and they've already done all the hard work of making the shell. They just need to clean up the tuning a bit, put something on the nozzle so it's not so crazy undampened. So there you go. That's what I got. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.